I want to welcome everyone to Visionaries, where we believe your powerful message is the best way to grow your business, impact the world, and live a meaningful life. I do want to get into practical, and let me know too if you can't hear me or you can't see me super well, but let's get into just some practical techniques around podcasting. I guess, in fact, before I do that, I want to talk about kind of history of podcasting. Why do you think podcasting is relevant now more than ever? Today, now more than ever?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question because it's not like a platform; it's a medium. It's almost like email, right? Like it's just something that you use to communicate to people, and it's a list, something that you can own. You know, we usually call podcasts like an audio email list.
Yeah,
it's an asset that you can always, they'll listen as long as but it's more themed around a show. While email list can be general, just communication. So the history starts in radio. It's just radio is for a different technology. It's not for smartphones. It's not for computers. It's for radio devices. Podcasting is just the evolution of radio where it can interface with apps and the internet. So there's a lot of different podcasts. I mean, obviously people are listening. We're more in the, using it to grow your business and your brand, but the biggest podcasts aren't that. It's around entertainment. It's around news, etc. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, and it goes back to the days of podcasting, and my thought even goes back into before there was even kind of a broadcast channel available to podcasting, where something that makes podcasting unique to, say, video is that it uses the power of voice versus just a visual medium. And, back before radio or any kind of form of podcast was available, people still used similar techniques, whether it was obviously the storytelling aspect or the side of like adding sound design in some ways, to communicate different messages. And so to me, it's podcasting and the meaning behind it that has existed as one of the longest like standing types of content out there to get a message shared.
Yeah, my favorite part about it is that people could fit it into their life as they see needed.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can do it. Because not saying this is good, but we live in a world where people multitask more, and they're busy, very busy. So the fact that they can listen on their drive, because that's the only time their drive to work, because that's the only time they get to, be inspired or motivated to do something more, and you get to be there, or help them, and like they could focus on you. It's really powerful. So a lot of people listen when they work out. Most people listen in their car. Other people listen when they're doing the laundry, etc. So they're able to still live their life and listen to you with voice. It doesn't need their visual attention, which video is great. I'm sure you know. I love video.
Yeah. But, video is a big part of my world for sure. But yeah, you're completely right. And I love the side of past consumption, because I feel like the commitment level doesn't need to be near as high. Like, say when someone's tuning in for like a webinar or a workshop, where you do have to be fully committed to both the visual and audio experience to actually learn something. But podcasting is like, I think it removes that excuse or that time factor for people where they can passively do it. I remember road trips all the time growing up, and this like predates the popularity of podcasting, but obviously radio and audiobooks, for example, were very popular then. And I think we tune into like Harry Potter, and other audiobooks on these long road trips with my family. And, or I remember doing puzzles too, where it's like, you can do other activities that you can kind of split your time, but yet get two forms of satisfaction, both with like the activity you're doing that may not require a lot of focus, but also at least learning and listening to storytelling and other tips and help you can get through like business podcasting too.
Yeah, it's just a lot of consumption. It's easy. I will say, even though there is that convenience factor, the most important thing is the know, like, trust factor. So mainly the psychology piece and how to get people to like you, the personality piece. That's what needs to be like the emphasis, not necessarily, because it's not like other stuff is harder to get people to commit to, like you were saying, like webinars. Like I think less people are like they're becoming more kind of blind to that. And even like books in some way, even though a lot of people read books, like the masses. And if you think about it, like if you just change your perspective, like I've had a lot of downloads of my podcast and a lot of consumption as far as hours. We've been trying to quantify that more, the importance of it. You know, we were even giving soon clients, like we call it the 3M award. So 1,000,000-minute member. So people hit 1,000,000 minutes, because like that's what you want with a book. That's what you want. You just want consumption. So like I've written many books if I look at my consumption, and people like, but I haven't wrote a book. But as far as the consumption way, so it's just it's definitely a big asset if you're a marketer. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, and I love that you pointed out the fact that like you haven't necessarily written a book, but you have spoken a book, you know, and that, you know, if you just hand it over to like
if I wanted to put it,
you could.
Some people do that too. Like a lot of books are ghostwritten from their podcast content, because you can just get the transcripts and it's your voice. And I know a lot of people who ghostwrite books where it's literally they just interview you. And that's it, because who's writing their book? A lot of big people aren't, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Oh man. And I love the aspect too that, you know, it really becomes a body of work, you know, not only that legacy element, but I think audio more than video in other forms, although video is becoming far easier to record as well. How easy is it to remove the barriers, say, of like looking good, right? When you have to often feel like you look good, or we were talking before, like, hey, are there any boogers in my nose? There's things in my teeth,
my nose,
you know, doing video, but you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You just need to know like, oh, what am I going to talk about that is actually relevant to the audience?
That is a hindrance for a lot of people, because like one of our clients initially wanted to do video everything, but then she realized like it was a roadblock. She would have to have her makeup ready, yada yada, while she was like with the mic. Her name's Allison Prince. Her podcast is like doing amazing, but with the mic, just her talking to this, it allows her to get her message out quicker and make it easier for her, less stressful. And yeah.
No, and it's so true. And I think, I think it's one of the best forms of content to use, and we have even fewer excuses to do it, right? I think it just comes down to making sure you have confidence in a clear message, something to attract the right people that who you want to serve. So for those who you're like, okay, like I feel like my message is ready. Maybe I've tried a podcast in the past and didn't really work out, or I want to step into podcasting. What would you present as like a simple 3-step plan for someone to get started and grow a podcast?
Yeah. So I actually just did an episode on this.
Oh,
I called it like the full growth strategy for a podcast. Some of it we covered, like going down to the fundamentals, like, you know, what do you do? Like, what do you help people with? And then knowing who you help people with. It's a simple question, but a lot of people aren't clear on that. And then how do you like find those people? So knowing who those communities are. And we could dive into these each. So it's like, what do you do? Who do you help them with? Where do they exist? So what communities are they in? How do you engage with them? And then why will they listen to your content? How do you make content that's good for them? So each one of those is crucial. I don't know which one you want to dive into first.
The first one, I think.
As far as getting traffic to your podcast?
Yeah.
Which one?
Oh, I think the first one is like, you know, it's really one of the first steps. It's like identifying some of those initial questions.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
digging into that a little bit.
A lot of people already know that, what they do, what services. And when your podcast, you want it to kind of blend it into your business. We always make that a big emphasis. People are doing a podcast that doesn't fit their business goals, because then they're both headed towards the same kind of North Star. They're almost taking different routes, people's podcasts with their business, and it's becomes too much friction, and people stop it or they quit it. But if it's not, and I mean, this has to sometimes do with people not having the right business goals, you know, like they don't have OKRs or objectives to reach to, and how is the podcast strategically helping you get there? Some people, you know, it's a tool. Some people use it for networking. Some people use it just for brand authority. Like me personally, I use it mainly for authority. I'm not necessarily selling anything. I use it mainly just to get my content everywhere. I use it as a top of the funnel content. So the podcast exists for me to break it up and make me still have a presence online, essentially. Because if you don't have a presence, then people forget about you. And sometimes I just people need to remind people about me, and they'll remember to work with me.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
It's as simple
like,
as that. Yeah.
People will message me not even related to the content, but the content reminded them about something, or they have another question. So I think I went a different route from your question there.
No,
initially.
but it's good though. Well, like, and I love that you brought that up, because there's a process that I pull people through in the marketing side of what we do with ContentSupply. And you mentioned know, like, trust. We call it know, love, trust, because know
I like that better.
Is an early phase of a sales funnel or of a customer journey, where you initially must get people to first get to know you before they can fall in love with you. Think of it like a real actual relationship, right? And eventually they trust you by paying you. And so that initial know phase of marketing, it comes down with exposure and attracting people. And it could be as simple as, like, they don't need to actually hear your message. They may already know that. But if they just simply see your face or see your name and have any kind of cue to you, then the relevancy of the timing of that message or that exposure will be, like you said, it's like, oh, Daxy equals podcast. I'm ready to do this, or I have this question, or I want to buy a podcast related product. And it's just that quick cue of, like, getting to know, and then it's going to progress them to that next step.
Yeah, because everyone's at different phases as far as where they want to work with you or how they relate with you. And I actually love I'm going to use that now, know, love, trust, because I think there is a difference from being liked and loved, and I've actually learned this recently. I had an epiphany, some of it has to do with sales, but it's always easier to sell when you're interested in them, instead of trying to make them interested in you. So you kind of thinking about the other person way more than you care about what they think about you. And I think you could tell when people do that in content, where they feel like, oh, they're speaking to me or they understand me, instead of you trying to be like, oh, look at me. And it takes more effort and creativity, I think.
Oof. It's really hard. And I think, and I just did it there, but I think it's tricky to not use I or me or my, like those possessive words or those.
What you can do if you're
words.
saying a story,
right?
If you're saying a story, you can
relevant.
do that.
But it's still really tricky though, because it's easy to turn the content to be about ourselves when ultimately it should not be about ourselves. And I think when we first start creating content, a lot of our content looks fairly selfish. And so I believe, kind of like if you're interested in growing any kind of relationship, I mean, I think about when I first met my wife, she was never going to fall in love with me if she actually never got to know me first, and then I'm not going to get her to trust me or to say yes to proposal until she, she falls in love with me. So, like, each one follows the other, but it can be a very simple 3-step process that you have to recognize, okay, what step in their journey can I deliver this message through podcast that gets them ready to move to the next step.
And I will also say, so initially you were saying, what if people weren't having success with their podcast or they're kind of hitting roadblocks? People also have to understand the function of a podcast. I'm still assuming most people listening are in the education space. They're trying to speak to people and, tell them, make good content around their industry, right?
Right.
Not necessarily entertainment. That's a whole different route. Like if it's comedy entertainment, then you just need to make people laugh, right? That's more creative, like subjective. But in this space, you have to know that it's not going to be your best first interaction with someone in your podcast. It's more for nurturing. So after you've already delivered some value or they're aware of you somehow through, a Facebook group or a lead magnet or something, and then they go to the podcast to go deeper. Because that's like, I mean, do you ever listen to podcasts of someone and you have no idea who they are? Like if it's a solo episode or something?
No, I mean, it's usually through an
unless it's word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth, yeah.
Yeah, if it's word of mouth, which is most podcasts grow with word of mouth. But if it's like not word of mouth, like, do you?
No, like, and I don't think podcast? I'm trying to think. Like, I think there's maybe initially when I first got on downloaded like the Apple Podcast app or wherever I listen. Now I'm trying to other apps too, but I think about once I went through the browse section and started looking at podcasts, where it's like then you have to commit. Like, okay, can I trust this person based on the cover image? their thumbnail image.
You go
or
through
the
a
title
vetting
of the
process.
podcast. But yeah,
You look at a few things.
oh yeah, you're seeing what's relevant to you. Well, I mean, what do you, psychology wise, like, what do you think some of those cues are that are important as far as like the thumbnail to the podcast title?
Yeah, it's very dependent on the brand we're working with and kind of their style, and also what phase of business they're at. Usually when it's bigger people, if you already have an audience, you want to go more after identity or movement type names, like, plant the flag in the ground, like Allison Prince, like Because I Can. She's going for a big message. And she's also trying to put a wider net and then narrow it in. But that's because she's experienced. I wouldn't recommend that if you're starting out. If you're starting out, you want to make it clear as day why someone's listening, I'm trying to think of an example. All right, so we work with a client who's in the real estate space, and that traditionally is a very boring industry. All the real estate podcasts feel like they're for other real estate people, even though their goal is to talk to not real estate people, which is funny.
Yeah.
It's just that's how their mind operates. They do done for you real estate, but so we had to position it around replace your income, something that the average folk can relate with. And oh, by the way, we help you do this by automating your real estate. So the angle that they enter the market is based off of curiosity, and it also presents like a result, something that people want, so that there's longevity built into like the theme of the show. So that's usually the things you could tell when you look at the artwork or looking at the titles or the description. You could tell, does it make you want to like listen? Is there curiosity there, or I guess desire in there? So
yeah,
there's a lot of elements to that.
Oh, yeah. For sure. It's so fascinating too, because I think with the barrier of entry, it can be so easy to be like, hey, I'm just gonna hit record and publish a podcast. But the strategy behind launching a podcast is really interesting that you've hinted at, because it shows it sounds like kind of two areas of identifying where you're at. One, like Allison Prince, who she's actually a former client of mine. So I know Allison pretty well, and she's amazing with her movement. And so, but yeah, with Allison, like she already had,
she's awesome.
Yeah, she's so awesome. She already had, like you said, a captive audience that she's growing. And so there's clarity there. But for those who need to do a little bit more attraction initially, like there's two different identities you got to speak to. And so I'm so glad you pointed out, because it's recognizing, well, where am I in my own journey with my messaging that I'm putting out there?
Yeah. And I don't talk about this a lot, because like when you talk about branding, it sounds so boring, like just the word. And you could do bad branding. But like it's so important to know like why you're different and kind of your angle or unique position to things. So that you can like, have your space. The blue ocean is what they call it, but it's very like even all the new clients we work with who don't launch a podcast with, we have to rebrand a lot, because after we go deep, we're like, this isn't really like inspiring or motivating. It doesn't look like. So we just really try to like think of like first impressions. Someone who had no idea who you are, like would be able to be like hell yes or hell no. Usually think about it in extremes.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think so from that moment where they identify where they're at and they, I guess, start to publish or get some kind of system in place, like what would you say is a next right step for them to begin publishing and get familiar with that process?
As far as for getting better results for their podcast?
Yeah, or I mean, you kind of talked about identifying early on, like, hey, what's my intention? Where am I at? Like, what style podcast do I need to set up? Here are some guiding questions.
Yeah, and
what do they
a
do
lot of it has to do with, like what I was saying earlier, making sure that it hits your business goals, and knowing your value ladder, how people naturally already ascend in your business, and how does the podcast bring up that next step? How do you promote your things? Think of every episode. You want to have, a lot of value, but also where people can go to learn more or work with you further, et cetera. Because that's naturally they'll want to do that if they like it. If they don't like it, then they won't want to do that. But I would say initially you want to focus in on one platform for redistributing and like promoting and et cetera, and make content that's relevant or good from the podcast there. There's a lot of different types of content you can do. If it's just audio, it's a little tougher to make good micro content. You might have to focus more on your copywriting skills heavily, more than audiograms are nice for stories, but like for feeds, like Square with the Square with the sound and just the graphic, they don't perform as well usually. But you want to focus heavily on the copywriting if you're making just audio, and having like good hooks. Like that's everything. Like really knowing ahead of time, like the intention of what is this episode about? Like what's the promise, the hook, and really trying to make it sound like it's relevant to your specific audience and specific problems and solutions. So copywriting is really, really important.
I'm so glad you hit like that aspect of it. And another thing that came to mind too that I wanted to pull out is this idea that like just don't publish for publishing's sake necessarily. I mean, you didn't put it in those words, but connecting your podcast as a medium back to a clear purpose, right? Like whether it's, hopefully the offer, or an offer or offers that you have in your business. Because, one thing we talk about at ContentSupply are these 3 simple phases of your content journey. So you need to develop a clear message so people can listen. You need to build a marketing plan that works, and then create impactful content or medium. So we break it down to messaging, marketing, and medium. And your medium is far more impactful and actually effective when you can have the messaging and the marketing set up. And in that marketing area, that's where you start to connect, like, okay, what types of content or medium will work best for me to grow this part of my business, for have marketing work. And so, plugging podcasting into that, I mean, you got to have a product. If you're in business, you got to have a product to sell.
It's easier than people think. It's easier than people think. Like you can get like pretty high level as far as how you develop content, but essentially you just need to know what is your audience's questions, and then how do you position something like a sexy answer, or a sexy kind of like something that alludes to the answer, or can help you solve that thing that's based on a result or something that they want. It's what it is. Like we have a client who has like a few successful local. I just interviewed him actually. And we do 2 podcasts for him. He has one that's a local gym, and everything they do is just whatever people ask him in the gym, everything they say and do. And then people love it because they feel like you're literally using their words as ammo. So just really, if you know what people are asking your market, the questions, just make content around that, and then figure out how can you get those people to engage with your stuff. And then that's it.
Yeah.
So, but then obviously there's the good content piece, and then that's very subjective, and yeah.
Yeah, and it's the good content, valuable content, right? It's
and I mean you work with clients, right?
Yeah,
where you can make something, and this happened. I was talking to one of our friends recently about this, Kevin Anson, and he was saying like you can make something that's good, that is good, but if they don't like it, they don't even want to put it out in the market or test it, even though we know like, oh, this is something we've done before. It like looks good, it sounds good, and the creative element is subjective. But it's super important, the creative element, a lot of marketers understand that, making things look creatively pleasing. So,
yeah,
because then people on the other side, they're like, oh, this is something that I can enjoy. It adds to the experience. They can tell that there was effort. So then in their mind, they're like, oh, I should pay attention because this is something serious, So yeah.
Yeah. That's powerful. And one thing that I love with that too is, I think it's easy to dismiss the variable of creative when it comes to, say, advertising or marketing, because sometimes something as simple, say, as like a cell phone video for video advertising can perform well. You put a simple message out there and it connects. But adding more creative into it, and so, in the context of podcasting, what do you think more creativity looks like? When you go to build out a podcast.
Yeah. And I will also say that it's very tangible. Like it's always the best reaction when we have a client, they just send us content and then we do the creative stuff to it. And then like the reaction is always like, whoa, this sounds way better. Or like than what I originally said. It just kind of amplifies things, right? So the main things, like, so obviously I have a good team. So there's a lot of stuff that's in their brains. I just try to communicate well between them. We have designer. I'm not a designer or anything. I'm mainly from the audio space. I'm more around making things sound good. But the main things is having a brand theme, like colors, fonts, and being congruent everywhere, so people feel like they're getting the same experience, even whether it's a YouTube thumbnail or their website. They feel the same when they see your thing, right? So there's congruency there. Having like a headline that pops out, so having that text element, even if it's video or copywriting, and there's a lot of factors for the copywriting piece, I would say, like on how to do good copywriting. And sometimes it's dependent on the audience and your voice. So I don't know. That doesn't answer your question too well.
There's so many variables, though. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also have people who are better at me than in a lot of things. I can tell when something's not interesting. So when I'm writing, so that's one thing I'm probably decent at, writing, copywriting. I always try to think about like making every word impactful. Like if I don't need a word, I'll try to remove it, especially for an episode title. Like I want to make it condensed so that every word like evokes a feeling. I'm gonna try to get straight to the point. Sometimes those are nouns. Sometimes those are numbers. People get attracted to numbers, and really trying to get to meat of things with headlines and hooks. So
yeah, and
that's the most important part of anything. The first sentence, the headline.
The headline or what you say in a podcast and things like that as the hook. So
how you tee it up,
yeah, how you tee it up. There's a powerful side of podcasting too that happens after you hit record, and that comes down to distribution and syndication or repurposing. Three ways to say it in some ways. How do you think that plays a role in like scaling your podcast and getting more exposure to it?
Yeah, so the redistribution piece, it plays a big role, but only if you're active on those platforms. I mean, we don't really live in an age where your just organic content can go viral out of nowhere unless you're, it's something very politically charged, I feel like, or something that's around something that's more universal. If it's niched, your things don't really go viral if it's niched.
Yeah.
You have to be doing active things to get people to follow you, like you. And sometimes, like I have a virtual assistant who helps me with this now because I know the importance of it. But initially, like I was in Facebook groups of other podcasters or marketers, people who would know or like me, love me, or trust me, and I would answer their questions, or I would like and reply to their stuff and add 50 to 100 people a day, so that when I do start doing this redistribution stuff, people will engage, or they'll share it, or they'll react. So that's kind of the groundwork. And then, I mean, so scaling and growing. Some people that might not be like, you don't need a huge podcast for some people to hit their goals, right? Like the other client I was mentioning, he's more about depth. He helps gym owners. So he's just trying to talk to the right people, and then have them work with him. And as long as he's doing that, like it doesn't need to be a huge podcast. It just needs to talk to the right people. So the podcast is a puzzle in how people generate leads. Like the podcast should be a big part of that if you are going to do a podcast. And then that's when the redistribution piece comes into play. So
yeah,
but sure. I mean, we can dive deeper into that if you want.
Yeah, I think simply, we talk about this in different trainings, and I think it's a hot topic as far as like content repurposing goes among VAs, freelancers.
Yeah, it's very techy, and it's very
totally.
There's a lot to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's simply this idea that you can take your podcast and you turn it into 10 other new types of content pieces, whether, like you've referenced earlier, audio or waveform graphics, animations, quote cards, emails, social, posts, just ways to syndicate or reshare a very similar message across different platforms. But I think it maximizes those who are the hosts and the experts behind the podcast to get more exposure to it. And so they're
more likely to share it, etc.
Yeah, and, totally.
And also, I'm assuming people listening know like what an SOP is, or like how to like hire someone and tell them step by step what to do. I'm assuming. I don't know if that's a wrong assumption to make.
So it stands for standard operating procedure. For those who don't know what SOP is, but many do, right? Like systems and getting your business to run like clockwork is definitely a powerful part of what a lot of these people are learning. A lot of those listening and watching are learning.
So yeah, so like you want to have that for all of the type of redistribution you can do. Initially, if you don't know what to do, I'd recommend hire someone who will also create the SOP for you. But you have to like what they're doing, obviously, for it to work. But you want them to like, pay them to train you on what they're doing to your content. And then you want to, clients are always surprised when we show them our SOPs that we create for their content. There's a lot, like it gets very detailed, like do this, don't do that, click here, don't click here. And then, there's a lot of details to someone's like style. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, you can standardize it for many clients, but would you say there's quite a bit of customization based on the type of client and industry that you have to do for these SOPs?
Overall, when the mindset when people are creating content is different depending on the client. Which people, if people listening and they have a team, like the main things you want to consider is like have them sound like you. And a lot of that has to do with like, what are the words you use? Do you use emojis? Do you not use emojis? Do you use all caps? Like little nuances like that. Because some people, we run into this a lot, like how they speak is different from how they write. You might be the same if you're listening to this and you want to make sure that people know that who are doing stuff for you. So a lot of it has to do around that. Sometimes you can do it, but some people suck at doing it. Actually, I wouldn't say everyone do it first themselves. But I will say it is interesting if people do things themselves, whether it's audio editing, video editing, I'm sure because you get to really think about, it's almost like if a basketball player watches replays and they see how their game was, if you're creating your content, you can really like see like, the rawness of it and how you can improve, etc.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing a podcast, you're trying to become more of a personality, become more charismatic, make better content, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I love it too, and the thing that's interesting to me about SOPs is that it does really standardize a checklist or a process you follow, but also a service offering as well. Like you do done for you services, and so when you can use that same process, plug it into each new client. And so a team can follow like, hey, do this, check that off, move to the next thing, check that off. And that is the successful, like, from that one audio file of a podcast, it's moved from hand to hand like it's a baton in a relay race until the finish line where it's distributed and it starts to get the exposure that it needs.
And like if people think that's a lot, like don't try to do everything at once. Like just figure out like, all right, how do I write good show notes? Like that's it. Like how do I make my podcast have good show notes? All right, once we get that dialed in, we have the process. I kind of know, the length I'm shooting for, or the focus of the show notes. How do I, make good graphics? And then you build that, and then all right, now how do we use the graphics to make good audiograms and write good emails and then blog posts? If you try to do everything at once, it could be overwhelming to people. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. Well, I love these different, we talked about kind of early guiding questions you ask yourself before you hit record and start a podcast. And then we didn't get too much into the production side, right? Where, what microphone and all these pieces. And we can definitely list those resources. And I'm sure you have plenty as well in the description of this video and this episode. But just a simple note to that, the best mic you have is the one you have on you. The same way with recording videos, the best camera you have is the camera you have on you, and that's often your phone. You can do a quick voice memo, and it may not be the highest quality, but it's still a good enough quality to get your message out there, as long as you have a solid strategy in place.
Yeah, people, and I see this all the time, like a lot of big producers still just use their phone for a lot of stuff, even their ads. People making a lot of money from their ads is literally just their smartphone.
Yeah, which is
like,
insane.
It's just about which I mean, it's still a skill, I think, like how you kind of command the presence in a good ad or something, or using stuff from your phone. Like you have to be, animated in a way, which is the main thing. It has to be animated and also have something behind the message, some weight behind the message. Yeah, I'm always about like, we have our minimums. We recommend to people ATR 2100 is a good one, just to sound good enough. Because if it is really bad, then it could be like to the point where it'll actually get people away from your content.
It's distracting.
Like if you listen to a podcast and it sounds like it's on a dial-up phone, which I've seen a lot, it causes cognitive dissonance. It's almost like going to the movie theater and the movie's like in not 1080p, right? It's in like, it's buffering, or there's 360, it just takes you off the content, which you don't really want to do. So, and it's not that expensive nowadays. Like, you can have a good setup with video for like $150, just a good webcam, good mic, and then maybe a lot of softwares are free. So,
yeah, completely. Yeah. So, I mean, and literally it's like, I would say majority of people have a smartphone to get decent audio and video. But it's understanding. I would say just start publishing without those massive barriers. And you hit on a really important piece too, is like, add in the other bells and whistles, you can call it, over time, whether it's like, hey, let's improve the design, or let's get a better microphone to record this. But I would say the tools, although important, are the least of your worries to making sure that you can actually launch a successful podcast.
Yeah. Like, people, like, they'll know when they're creating good content or have a rhythm. They'll naturally want to start doing more. You won't want to go to waste. So just like focus on like and getting good at that, and then and then if anything, it'll strengthen how you kind of think. A lot of times when I create episodes, like, I have to think. Like, I don't just like record all the time. Like, I mean, at least me, like, I like to think about, what are the points I want to hit on. Sometimes I do research, or sometimes I have to reflect on what I've done. I've never like put it in. And then that helps you strengthen knowledge of your business and your marketing, etc.
Yeah, hands down. Well, where would you send people who are looking to improve their podcasting, if they're already doing it, or looking to launch their first or next podcast as a resource?
Yes. So, yeah, we have a Facebook group with a lot of people, Podcast Success Secrets, and then our website, legacypodcasting.com. That's where we do all of our services. We do free strategy sessions, and those are the two main places. Yeah.
Love it. Well, hey, Daxy, you're a powerhouse when it comes to podcasting. I appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. Once again, if you would like to learn more about how you can use your unique message and share it with the world through video, and create videos that actually are professional and perform, bring you money, and all of the results and influence that you want to make, then I invite you to learn more by going to ContentSupply.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon.